You're a janitor, not a designer. Security, escort him out. The words sliced through the glass-walled conference room with the kind of certainty that only power could afford. No one spoke. No one moved. And no one, not the executives, not the engineers, not even the woman who had just fired him, had the slightest idea that within 5 minutes, everything inside Hayes Innovations was about to change. The headquarters of Hayes Innovations rose 32 stories above downtown Chicago, its mirrored exterior reflecting the pale morning sky. Inside, the energy was electric. Employees hurried through polished hallways carrying tablets, coffee cups, and presentation folders. Today was the biggest day in the company's history. A billionaire investor was arriving at 10 o'clock sharp to evaluate the firm's newest industrial design project, a breakthrough transportation system that executives believed would secure a contract worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Every department was on edge. Every detail mattered. On the 26th floor, Nathan Walker pushed a cleaning cart down a hallway lined with framed patents and innovation awards. His gray maintenance uniform blended into the background so completely that most people barely noticed him. That was fine with Nathan. For the past 4 years, he had learned how to live quietly. He cleaned floors, emptied trash bins, fixed light fixtures, and returned home every evening to the one person who mattered most in his life, his 10-year-old daughter, Emily. The fluorescent lights reflected softly off the polished marble as Nathan paused outside the executive design studio. Through the glass walls, dozens of engineers crowded around a large digital display. The final design review was underway. At the center stood Victoria Hayes, CEO of Hayes Innovations. At 36, she was one of the youngest technology executives in America. Brilliant, driven, demanding. Her reputation for perfection was known throughout the industry. One mistake could end a career. One success could launch it. Nathan glanced toward the screen as he rolled past. The image displayed a complex transportation module rotating slowly in three-dimensional simulation. He intended to keep walking. Then something caught his eye. His footsteps slowed. The model rotated again. Nathan stopped completely. His expression remained calm, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Something wasn't right. For a few seconds, he simply watched. Numbers scrolled across the display. Measurements updated. Engineers discussed load tolerances and efficiency metrics. Then Nathan quietly stepped closer to the glass. A younger engineer noticed him and frowned. Nathan studied the design one final moment. Then he gently tapped on the open doorway. Several heads turned immediately. Victoria looked up. Her expression suggested she had already been interrupted too many times that morning. "Yes?" she asked. Nathan cleared his throat politely. "I'm sorry to interrupt. I think there may be a structural issue in the support alignment." Silence followed. Complete silence. Several engineers stared at him as though he had started speaking a foreign language. Victoria blinked once, then twice. "Excuse me." Nathan remained respectful. "The center load distribution appears uneven. If the simulation reaches maximum operational capacity, the stress point could shift." One engineer laughed. Another smirked openly. Victoria folded her arms. "Mr. Walker," she said, reading the name stitched onto his uniform, "are you giving engineering advice?" Nathan shook his head gently. "Just an observation." A few chuckles spread around the room. The sound echoed against glass and steel. Victoria's patience evaporated instantly. "An observation?" she repeated. "You clean floors." Nathan said nothing. "Our design team includes graduates from MIT, Stanford, and Caltech," Victoria continued. "They've spent 18 months building this project." More laughter followed. Nathan remained completely still. The room buzzed with confidence and pride. Outside the windows, sunlight reflected off neighboring skyscrapers. Inside, something quieter lingered beneath the noise. Dignity, the kind that never needed to raise its voice. Victoria stepped toward the doorway. "Did you touch this design file?" she asked sharply. Nathan hesitated. "Only to zoom in after I noticed the alignment issue." The room froze. Victoria's face hardened immediately. "You accessed a confidential project?" "Only for a moment." "That wasn't your job." Nathan nodded. "No, ma'am. You're a janitor, not a designer." Her voice carried across the entire studio. "And effective immediately, you're terminated." Several employees exchanged nervous glances. Others looked away. Nathan stood quietly as the words settled into the room. No argument. No excuses. No anger. Just silence. Victoria pointed toward the hallway. Security will assist you. Nathan lowered his eyes briefly and nodded once. Understood. He turned toward his cleaning cart. Behind him, conversations slowly resumed. Engineers returned their attention to the presentation. Victoria walked back toward the display screen. Everything seemed normal again. Everything seemed under control. But as Nathan rolled his cart toward the elevator, a folded sheet of paper slipped quietly from his pocket and landed near the conference room doorway. On it, written in neat handwriting, was a single warning about the exact failure point hidden deep inside the design. 5 minutes later, the investor's presentation would begin, and every person in that room would wish they had listened. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime, sealing Nathan Walker away from the world he had quietly served for 4 years. He stood alone beside his cleaning cart as the numbers descended one floor at a time. 26, 25, 24. The stainless steel walls reflected a tired man in a gray uniform, but they did not reveal the thoughts behind his calm eyes. Above him, on the 26th floor, the future of Hayes Innovations was moving forward without him, or so everyone believed. The lobby buzzed with anticipation. Receptionists straightened brochures. Assistants checked schedules. Security officers adjusted earpieces. Through the massive glass entrance, a line of black luxury vehicles rolled to the curb. The investor had arrived. Charles Whitmore stepped out first, his silver hair perfectly combed, his navy suit tailored with understated elegance. At 68, he had built a reputation as one of the most respected investors in American industry. He rarely traveled for presentations. When he did, people paid attention. Inside the executive conference room, Victoria Hayes stood near the presentation screen, reviewing final notes. Her confidence had returned quickly after the interruption. The room hummed with nervous excitement. Ryan Brooks adjusted his tie and glanced over the simulation one final time. Engineers whispered among themselves. Tablets glowed. Coffee cups steamed. Everyone was focused on the opportunity ahead. No one was thinking about the janitor who had just been fired. Downstairs, Nathan signed a separation form at the Human Resources desk. The young representative looked uncomfortable. "I am sorry this happened, Mr. Walker." Nathan offered a small smile. "It is all right. Do you need a few minutes?" she asked. "No, thank you." His voice remained steady. He gathered the few personal items from his locker. A framed photograph of Emily standing beside a pumpkin patch last fall. A worn paperback novel. A blue lunch container. Nothing more. Years of work reduced to a handful of belongings. Yet there was no bitterness in his expression, only quiet acceptance. Outside, a cool breeze drifted through downtown Chicago. Nathan stepped onto the sidewalk and checked his phone. A text message waited from Emily. "Are you still picking me up after school, Dad?" Nathan smiled immediately. "Always." The answer came back with a heart emoji and a smiling face. He slipped the phone into his pocket and began walking toward a nearby bus stop. The city moved around him in a blur of car horns, distant sirens, and hurried footsteps. Above the streets, clouds drifted slowly across the spring sky. Meanwhile, 26 floors above, Charles Whitmore entered the conference room. Every executive rose to greet him. Hands were shaken. Polite laughter followed. Victoria welcomed him personally. "We are honored to have you here." Charles smiled warmly. "I am looking forward to seeing what your team has built." The lights dimmed. The massive display screen illuminated the room with a soft blue glow. Ryan stepped forward confidently. "Thank you all for coming. Today we are proud to unveil the future of urban transportation." Slides appeared. Charts followed. Engineers nodded. Investors listened carefully. For the first few minutes, everything unfolded exactly as planned. Then the simulation began. The digital prototype rotated smoothly across the screen. Data streamed beside it. Efficiency metrics flashed green. Ryan smiled. Victoria relaxed slightly. Charles watched quietly. The transportation module accelerated through a virtual stress test. 10%, 20%, 40%, 60%. Then something happened. A tiny warning icon appeared in the corner of the display. Ryan frowned. "That is unusual." Another warning appeared. Then another. The simulation hesitated. Numbers fluctuated unexpectedly. Engineers shifted in their seats. Victoria sat forward. The room grew quieter. The digital model attempted to compensate. For a moment it appeared stable. Then the entire simulation froze. A red alert flashed across the screen. Structural load redistribution failure. Nobody spoke. The air itself seemed to stop moving. Ryan stared at the display. One engineer began typing frantically. Another checked calculations. Charles Whitmore slowly removed his glasses. The room that had been filled with confidence only minutes earlier now sat in complete silence. And near the conference room doorway, unnoticed beside a chair leg, a folded sheet of paper waited patiently to be discovered. The red warning message remained frozen on the giant display screen like a crack spreading across glass. No one in the conference room moved. No one wanted to be the first to speak. A few minutes earlier, the atmosphere had been filled with confidence, polished presentations, and ambitious promises. Now uncertainty hung in the air like a storm cloud. Ryan Brooks stared at the simulation dashboard. His fingers raced across the keyboard. "Give me a second," he said. "It is probably a software issue." Nobody answered. The silence itself felt louder than his voice. One engineer leaned forward. Another adjusted his glasses. A third began checking data logs. The glowing monitors reflected concern on faces that had been smiling only moments before. Victoria Hayes remained standing near the screen. Her posture was straight, but something had changed in her expression. Confidence was slowly giving way to concern. Charles Whitmore sat quietly at the end of the table. He was not a man who reacted quickly. Decades of experience had taught him patience. Yet even he could see the growing tension around him. Ryan restarted the simulation. The transportation module appeared again. The room collectively held its breath. The model rotated. Data streamed. The stress test began. 10%, 20%, 40%, 60%. Then the same warning appeared. Structural load redistribution failure. The simulation froze again. This time there was no denying it. The problem was real. Ryan swallowed hard. That should not be happening. But it is happening, Charles said calmly. His voice was not angry. Somehow that made it worse. Victoria stepped closer to the screen. "Can you isolate the issue?" Ryan hesitated. "We are trying." Another engineer looked up from her workstation. "The load balancing algorithm is reacting to a structural conflict." "What conflict?" Victoria asked. The engineer shook her head. "I do not know yet." The room grew even quieter. Outside the glass walls, downtown Chicago continued its normal rhythm. Traffic moved through intersections. Pedestrians crossed sidewalks. The city had no idea that inside one conference room, a multi-million-dollar opportunity was beginning to unravel. A junior engineer named Megan reached down to retrieve a tablet that had slipped beside her chair. As she bent over, her eyes landed on something folded near the conference room doorway. A single sheet of paper. "What is this?" she asked. No one paid attention at first. She picked it up and unfolded it carefully. Her eyes narrowed, then widened. "Ryan." He barely looked up. "Not now. Ryan." Something in her voice made him turn. She handed him the paper. The room watched as his expression changed almost immediately. "Where did you find this?" Megan pointed toward the doorway. Ryan read the handwritten notes again, then a third time. The paper contained a detailed warning regarding a structural alignment flaw and the exact load redistribution failure that was now appearing in the simulation. Even more unsettling, the prediction matched perfectly. The room became completely still. Victoria noticed the change. "What is it?" Ryan did not answer immediately. He simply handed her the paper. Victoria read the first line, then the second, then the final note at the bottom. "If operational load exceeds 62% capacity, stress transfer will shift to the secondary support structure and trigger system instability." Her heartbeat quickened. She looked up slowly. "Who wrote this?" Nobody answered. Then Megan spoke quietly. "I think it was Mr. Walker." The room fell silent again. Not the silence of confusion, the silence of realization. Victoria stared at the paper. Her mind replayed the conversation from less than 20 minutes earlier. The janitor standing respectfully in the doorway. The warning. The observation. The confidence she had dismissed. Across the room, another engineer shook his head in disbelief. "That is impossible." "Is it?" Charles Whitmore asked. Every eye turned toward him. He extended his hand toward the paper. Victoria passed it over. He studied the notes carefully. Unlike everyone else, he seemed less surprised by the technical precision and more interested in the handwriting itself. His eyes lingered on the signature at the bottom. "Nathan Walker." Something flickered across his face. Recognition. Brief but unmistakable. He leaned back in his chair and looked toward Victoria. Tell me about this man. Victoria felt an uncomfortable knot forming in her stomach. He was part of our maintenance staff. Charles raised an eyebrow. Was? The single word landed heavily. Victoria looked away. For the first time all morning, she had no confident answer. And somewhere several blocks away, Nathan Walker sat quietly at a bus stop, completely unaware that the company he had just left was beginning to ask a question that would change everything. Who exactly was the janitor they had just fired? The question lingered in the conference room long after it was asked. Who exactly was Nathan Walker? No one seemed eager to answer. The air conditioning hummed softly above them. Computer fans whispered beneath desks. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, clouds drifted across the Chicago skyline. Inside, however, the atmosphere had changed completely. The presentation was no longer about innovation. It was about survival. Ryan Brooks rubbed his forehead and stared at the failed simulation. "We can fix this," he said, though he sounded less certain than before. One of the senior engineers looked up from her monitor. "Not today." Ryan turned sharply. "What does that mean?" She pointed toward the screen. "The structural conflict is embedded throughout the design architecture. This is not a single error. It affects multiple systems." Another engineer nodded reluctantly. "If we correct the support alignment now, we have to rebuild several core calculations." The room fell silent again. Victoria Hayes folded her arms tightly. Every passing second felt heavier than the last. Charles Whitmore remained composed, but his expression revealed careful disappointment. He had invested decades evaluating companies. He understood the difference between a setback and a warning sign. "How long would the correction take?" he asked. Ryan hesitated. "Several weeks." A few executives exchanged uneasy looks. Weeks might as well have been years. The entire purpose of today's meeting was to prove the project was ready now. Not next month. Not next quarter. Now. Charles slowly placed Nathan's handwritten note on the conference table. "Interesting," he said quietly. Everyone looked toward him. This gentleman identified the exact problem within moments. Nobody replied. Yet an entire engineering department missed it. The observation landed heavily. Victoria felt a knot tightening in her stomach. She replayed the encounter again. Nathan standing calmly in the doorway. Nathan speaking respectfully. Nathan offering a warning. She had not even considered the possibility that he might be right. Pride had answered before reason ever had the chance. Across the room, Megan spoke carefully. "There is something else." Victoria looked toward her. "What?" Megan enlarged a section of the simulation logs. The correction mentioned in his note. She clicked several commands. "If we apply his suggested adjustment, the instability disappears." Ryan stared at the screen. "That cannot be verified that quickly." "It already has been." She ran a simplified model. The transportation module completed the stress test. 80%, 90%, 100%. No warning appeared. No failure message flashed. The room became absolutely still. Ryan leaned closer. "Run it again." She did. The same result appeared. Stable, efficient, functional. A low murmur spread across the conference room. Not excitement. Shock. Charles Whitmore slowly smiled. Well, nobody missed the significance of that single word. Victoria looked at the simulation, then at the note, then back at the simulation. Her pulse quickened. "Human resources," she said suddenly. An assistant looked up. "Yes. Pull Nathan Walker's employee file." The assistant immediately left the room. Minutes passed. The atmosphere remained tense. Outside, sunlight reflected across neighboring skyscrapers. Inside, every person seemed trapped inside the same question. The assistant returned carrying a digital tablet. "I found his records." Victoria reached for it. Her eyes moved quickly across the screen. Then she stopped. "This cannot be right." Ryan looked over her shoulder. His face drained of color. Before joining the maintenance department 4 years earlier, Nathan Walker had worked as a senior design engineer. Not just any engineer. He had contributed to multiple transportation patents. He had received national industry awards. His name appeared on projects studied at universities across the country. The room stared in disbelief. Why would someone like that become a janitor? Megan whispered. Nobody had an answer. Then Charles Whitmore leaned forward. His eyes remained fixed on Nathan's name. "Because sometimes," he said softly, "life changes a person's destination without changing their abilities." Silence followed. A respectful silence. the kind that appears when arrogance finally gives way to truth. Victoria stared at the file for several long seconds. Then she stood abruptly. Where is he now? Human Resources checked the system. He signed his termination paperwork about 20 minutes ago. Can we contact him? We are trying. Another pause. Then the assistant looked up. He is not answering. For the first time that morning, genuine panic appeared on Victoria Hayes's face. Because somewhere beyond the glass towers, beyond the boardrooms and presentations, the one person capable of saving the project was quietly walking away. Victoria Hayes did not realize she was holding her breath until she exhaled sharply and pushed away from the conference table. The movement startled several people in the room. A few minutes earlier, she had been the most confident person in the building. Now she felt something unfamiliar pressing against her carefully controlled composure. Regret. The employee file remained open on the tablet before her. Nathan Walker, Senior Design Engineer, Patent Contributor, National Innovation Award recipient, Industry Research Fellow. The accomplishments stretched across the screen like a history nobody had bothered to discover. For years, he had spent 4 years cleaning floors inside a company that had no idea who he was. There has to be more, Victoria said quietly. Human Resources nodded. There is. Another document appeared on the screen. It contained employment records, professional achievements, conference appearances, and published research. Ryan Brooks stared in disbelief. I studied one of these transportation models in graduate school. He pointed toward an archived project. Nathan helped develop this? According to the records, yes, the Human Resources representative replied. The room fell silent again. Charles Whitmore leaned back in his chair. His eyes never left the screen. I knew I recognized the name. Everyone looked at him. You know him? Victoria asked. Charles nodded slowly. Years ago. The room grew attentive. Charles rarely volunteered personal stories. There was a transportation summit in Denver about 12 years ago. Hundreds of engineers attended. One presentation stood above all the others. He paused. Nathan Walker delivered it. Ryan blinked. You were there? Front row. Charles smiled faintly. The room was packed. Executives, investors, professors. Everyone expected another technical lecture. His expression softened slightly. Instead, a young engineer walked onto the stage and explained complicated systems so clearly that even people outside the industry understood them. Nobody interrupted. He was brilliant, Charles continued. Not because he knew more than everyone else. Because he could make everyone else better. The words lingered in the air. Victoria looked down at the termination form still displayed on another screen. Her signature sat at the bottom. Cold. Official. Final. Suddenly it felt very heavy. Across the city, Nathan sat on a weathered wooden bench beside a bus stop. Traffic moved steadily along the avenue. A light breeze carried the scent of spring rain through the air. He held a small paper cup of coffee purchased from a nearby street vendor. The warmth felt good against his hands. His phone vibrated. Another message from Emily. How was your day? Nathan smiled. Kids had a way of asking simple questions that carried complicated answers. He typed back. A little unexpected. But I am okay. A few seconds later she replied. Good. Because you always tell me that bad days do not get the final vote. Nathan laughed softly. Several nearby commuters glanced toward him. The sound was rare. Emily always had that effect on him. Back inside Hayes Innovations, Victoria continued reviewing Nathan's history. Then she reached a section that made her stop completely. Family leave records. Extended absence. Personal hardship. Industry withdrawal. The dates aligned with the period when his professional career had suddenly disappeared. She looked toward Human Resources. What happened? The representative hesitated respectfully. His wife passed away. Nobody spoke. According to the records, he resigned from multiple leadership positions afterward. Another pause. He became the sole parent of a young daughter. Ryan lowered his eyes. Megan stared at the table. Even Charles Whitmore looked saddened. The puzzle pieces finally began fitting together. Not a fallen genius. Not a failed engineer. A father. A man who had quietly chosen family over recognition. Victoria felt something shift inside her. She remembered Nathan's calm demeanor. His respectful tone. The absence of resentment. Most people would have defended themselves. Nathan had simply accepted humiliation with dignity and walked away. That realization hurt more than the failed presentation. Then an assistant rushed into the room, carrying a phone. We found him. Every head turned. Where? Victoria asked immediately. A transit camera spotted him near Jackson Boulevard. Relief washed through the room. Briefly. Then the assistant added, "His bus leaves in 8 minutes." Victoria did not hesitate. She grabbed her coat and headed toward the door. Behind her, Charles Whitmore rose from his chair. "Bring him back," he said quietly. Victoria stopped. "I intend to." Charles shook his head gently. No, his gaze was steady. "Do not bring back the engineer. Bring back the man you failed to respect." The room fell silent as Victoria hurried toward the elevators, carrying a lesson she would never forget and racing against a clock that was moving far faster than she wanted. The elevator seemed slower than it had ever been before. Victoria Hayes pressed the lobby button twice, even though it would not make the car move any faster. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirrored walls. Usually she liked what she saw. Confidence, control, leadership. Today she saw something else. A woman confronting the consequences of her own assumptions. The doors finally opened. She crossed the lobby at a near run, ignoring the surprised looks from employees and reception staff. Outside, the cool Chicago air greeted her with a sharp gust of wind. Traffic rolled steadily through the streets. Pedestrians filled the sidewalks. Somewhere among thousands of people was the one person she desperately needed to find. Several blocks away, Nathan Walker sat quietly beneath the glass shelter of a bus stop. The paper cup of coffee beside him was nearly empty. His small box of personal belongings rested on the bench. The city moved around him without urgency. A city bus pulled away from a nearby intersection. Bicycle tires hummed across pavement. A distant train horn echoed through the downtown corridor. Nathan checked his watch. He had enough time to reach Emily's school before dismissal. That thought brought him comfort. Whatever happened next, he would keep moving forward. He always did. His phone vibrated again. Emily had sent another message. "Guess what happened today?" Nathan smiled and typed back. "What happened?" The response arrived instantly. "I got an A on my science project." He laughed softly. "That is wonderful. I knew you could do it." A few seconds later, another message appeared. "Are you proud of me?" Nathan stared at the screen for a moment. His eyes softened. "More than you know." He slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked toward the cloudy sky. For a brief moment, the worries of the day felt smaller. Across town, Victoria climbed into a company vehicle. "Jackson Boulevard," she said. "As fast as legally possible." The driver nodded and pulled into traffic. During the ride, she could not stop replaying the events of the morning. Every detail seemed clearer now. Nathan had not argued. Nathan had not defended himself. Nathan had not reminded anyone of his accomplishments. He had simply offered help. When that help was rejected, he had walked away with dignity. The realization made her increasingly uncomfortable. Most people demanded respect. Nathan had demonstrated it. The vehicle stopped at a red light. Victoria looked out the window. A father was walking hand in hand with a small child. She remembered the record she had read. Sole parent. For years. Quiet sacrifices hidden behind a maintenance uniform. Suddenly, the achievements in Nathan's file seemed less impressive than the life he had chosen afterward. A notification appeared on her phone. Transit camera confirmed location. Bus stop. Jackson Boulevard and Monroe Street. Victoria looked up immediately. "That is it." The driver turned the corner. Less than a minute later, she saw him. Nathan sat beneath the shelter exactly as the image had shown. He looked calm, unhurried, completely unaware of the chaos unfolding back at headquarters. The vehicle had barely stopped before Victoria opened the door and stepped onto the sidewalk. Nathan noticed movement and glanced up. His expression showed mild surprise, but nothing more. "Ms. Hayes." She slowed her pace as she approached. For the first time all day, she was unsure what to say. The city noise seemed to fade into the background. Cars passed. Traffic lights changed. Somewhere nearby, a street musician played a soft melody on a saxophone. Yet neither of them moved. "Mr. Walker," she finally said. Nathan nodded politely. "Can I help you?" The question hit harder than she expected. Even now, after everything, he was offering help. Victoria took a breath. "I owe you an apology." Nathan studied her quietly. Not suspiciously, not angrily, simply listening. "I made assumptions about you," she continued. "I was wrong." Nathan looked down briefly at the coffee cup in his hand. "People make mistakes. This one may cost my company everything." A faint breeze lifted a few strands of Victoria's hair. Nathan remained silent. She continued. "The issue you identified was real. His expression did not change. I know. The answer was simple, honest, without arrogance. Victoria felt even smaller. We need your help. Nathan looked toward the street where another bus approached in the distance. Do you? He asked gently. Or do you need the version of me you were willing to listen to? The question settled between them. Quiet. Unavoidable. For the first time in years, Victoria Hayes found herself without a prepared response. Nathan's question lingered between them long after he spoke it. The approaching bus slowed as it neared the curb, its brakes releasing a soft hiss into the afternoon air. Commuters gathered their bags. A few stood and prepared to board. Yet Nathan remained seated, waiting calmly for Victoria's answer. She looked away briefly toward the busy street. For years she had built her career on having answers. Investors trusted her judgment. Employees followed her decisions. Competitors respected her confidence. But standing at a bus stop beside a man she had dismissed only an hour earlier, certainty suddenly felt impossible. You are right, she said quietly. Nathan did not respond. If you had walked into that room wearing a tailored suit and carrying a presentation portfolio, I would have listened. The honesty surprised even her. Instead, I saw a uniform. A breeze moved through the shelter. The bus doors opened. People stepped aboard. Nathan listened without interruption. That was my failure, Victoria continued. Not yours. The bus driver glanced toward Nathan. You getting on? Nathan smiled politely. Not this one. The driver nodded and pulled away. Neither Nathan nor Victoria moved. The city noise gradually returned around them. A delivery truck rolled past. Traffic lights changed. Somewhere nearby, construction equipment echoed between buildings. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary moments. Yet something important was happening. Not in a boardroom. Not in a conference presentation. At a simple bus stop. I appreciate the apology, Nathan finally said. Victoria exhaled slowly. But Nathan looked down at the small box resting beside him. An apology does not solve your engineering problem. No, and it does not rebuild trust. Victoria lowered her eyes. No, for several seconds neither spoke. Then Nathan's phone vibrated. He checked the screen. Another message from Emily. Do not forget my science project celebration. Nathan smiled immediately. Victoria noticed the change in his expression. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The look of a father thinking about his child. Your daughter? She asked. Nathan nodded. Emily. The one in the photo from your locker? Yes. Victoria remembered the image from the personnel file. A smiling girl standing beside a pumpkin display. Suddenly the story became more personal. Less about patents and presentations. More about priorities. You left your career for her. Nathan looked toward the skyline. I left a career because life changed. His voice remained calm. After my wife passed away, Emily needed a father more than the industry needed another engineer. Victoria absorbed the words quietly. You never wanted recognition? Nathan smiled faintly. Recognition does not help with homework. The answer carried no bitterness. Only perspective. For the first time all day, Victoria understood something important. Nathan had not stepped away because he failed. He had stepped away because he chose something he valued more. The realization made his accomplishments seem even greater. Her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Ryan Brooks. She answered immediately. Victoria? Ryan sounded anxious. The investors are still waiting. I know. Can he help? Victoria looked toward Nathan. Possibly. Ryan lowered his voice. If this project fails, hundreds of jobs could disappear. Nathan overheard the words. He remained silent, but something changed behind his eyes. Ryan continued. Not executives. Engineers. Designers. Support staff. Families. Victoria ended the call and slipped the phone away. Neither spoke for a moment. Then Nathan looked across the street where office workers hurried through crosswalks. Hundreds of people. Hundreds of responsibilities. Hundreds of lives connected to one decision. How many employees? He asked. Victoria answered immediately. 342. Nathan nodded slowly. And many have families. Yes. Another pause followed. The wind carried the distant sound of church bells from somewhere downtown. Nathan looked at the small box beside him, then at the city, then finally at Victoria. I am not interested in returning because you need a design fixed. Hope flickered across her face anyway. Nathan continued. And I am not interested in proving anyone wrong. Victoria waited. But 342 people should not pay the price for one bad decision. The words landed gently, yet they carried enormous weight. Victoria stared at him. Does that mean? Nathan stood and picked up the box containing his belongings. It means I will take a look. Relief washed across her face. Genuine relief. Not triumph. Not victory. Gratitude. Together, they began walking toward the waiting vehicle. As they reached the curb, Victoria glanced toward him. Why are you doing this? Nathan opened the passenger door and paused. His answer was simple. Because character matters most when nobody deserves your kindness. And for the second time that day, Victoria Hayes found herself speechless. Nobody expected the atmosphere to change the moment Nathan Walker stepped back into Hayes Innovations. Yet it did. The glass doors opened. Conversations slowed. Heads turned. Employees who had barely noticed him for years suddenly watched him cross the lobby, carrying the same small box of belongings he had carried out earlier that day. The difference was not in Nathan. It was in everyone else. The elevator ride to the 26th floor passed in silence. Victoria stood beside him. Neither spoke much. There was no need. The urgency of the situation filled every quiet moment between them. When the doors opened, executives and engineers were already waiting. Ryan Brooks approached first. His face showed a mixture of embarrassment and hope. Mr. Walker. Nathan nodded politely. Ryan. The younger engineer glanced downward for a moment before speaking. I should have listened. Nathan offered a small smile. Then listen now. The answer contained no accusation. Only calm. They entered the conference room together. Charles Whitmore remained seated at the far end of the table. The billionaire investor watched Nathan carefully. Unlike the others, he did not appear surprised. He simply looked pleased to see him. It has been a long time, Charles said. Nathan smiled faintly. Yes, it has. Several executives exchanged confused glances. Charles gestured toward the empty chair beside him. Good to see you again. Nathan shook his head. I would rather stand. Then he walked directly toward the display screen. The failed simulation still glowed on the massive monitor. Warning messages remained scattered across the design interface, like scars. Nathan studied the system quietly. No dramatic speech. No demand for recognition. No effort to prove anyone wrong. He simply focused on the problem. The room watched. 5 seconds passed. Then 10. Nathan reached for a digital stylus resting on the conference table. He adjusted one parameter. Then another. He zoomed into the structural model and highlighted a support pathway. The issue is not here, he said. It starts here. Ryan stepped closer. That section passed every review. Nathan nodded. Because everyone was looking at the symptom. He traced a line across the model. Not the source. Several engineers gathered around. Their expressions shifted from skepticism to curiosity. Nathan continued making adjustments. The room grew quieter with each movement. The load transfer assumes perfect environmental consistency, he explained. But transportation systems never operate under perfect conditions. He modified 3 variables. Real life is messy. Designs must respect that. Ryan stared at the updated model. We missed that. You were moving too fast, Nathan replied. Pressure makes intelligent people overlook simple truths. Charles Whitmore smiled from across the room. That sounded less like engineering and more like wisdom. Nathan completed the final adjustment and stepped back. Run the simulation. Ryan immediately executed the command. The room held its breath. The transportation module appeared. Data streamed across the screen. Stress testing began. 20%, 40%, 60%. No warning. 80%, 90%, 100%. The model continued operating smoothly. Efficiently. Perfectly. Nobody spoke. Ryan initiated a second test. Then a third. Then a fourth. Every result produced the same outcome. Stable. Reliable. Functional. Silence settled across the room. Not the silence of uncertainty. The silence of realization. Charles Whitmore slowly stood from his chair. He looked at the screen. Then at Nathan. Then back at the screen. Remarkable. The single word seemed to echo throughout the conference room. Victoria felt her throat tighten. Only hours earlier she had dismissed the man standing before her. Now every person in the room was witnessing what she had failed to see. One engineer shook his head in disbelief. Another quietly removed his glasses. Ryan stared at the simulation results as though they belonged to someone else. Nathan remained calm through it all. No pride. No celebration. No triumph. Just quiet professionalism. Charles walked forward and extended his hand. Nathan accepted it. You saved this project. Nathan shook his head gently. No, Charles raised an eyebrow. Nathan looked around the room. Projects are saved by teams. His gaze settled briefly on the engineers. I only pointed them in the right direction. Another silence followed. This one even deeper than before. Because everyone understood the truth. The strongest person in the room was not the CEO, not the investor, not the department heads. It was the man who had every reason to seek revenge and instead chose grace. And for the first time that day, nobody saw a janitor. They saw Nathan Walker. The silence remained long after the simulation ended. It lingered in the conference room, in the expressions of the engineers, and in the thoughts of everyone who had witnessed what had just happened. For some, it was admiration. For others, it was humility. For Victoria Hayes, it was both. The transportation model continued rotating smoothly on the giant display screen. Green indicators glowed across the interface. The crisis was over. The project had survived. Yet somehow that no longer felt like the most important thing that had happened that day. Charles Whitmore looked around the room and smiled. I believe I have seen everything I needed to see. Relief spread across the faces of executives and department heads. Ryan Brooks nearly collapsed into a chair. Several engineers exchanged exhausted smiles. Months of work had been rescued in less than an hour. Charles gathered his notes and turned toward Victoria. The investment proceeds as planned. A collective breath seemed to release throughout the room. Then Charles looked toward Nathan. Provided the company remembers the lesson it nearly paid millions of dollars to learn. No one disagreed. Victoria stepped forward slowly. The conference room became quiet again. Nathan stood calmly beside the screen, preparing to leave as if the entire afternoon had been nothing extraordinary. That, more than anything else, amazed her. He had just solved a problem that an entire department could not solve. He had restored confidence to investors. He had protected hundreds of jobs. Yet he seemed interested only in getting home. Victoria looked around the room. Then she made a decision. Before anyone leaves, she said, there is something I need to do. The executives turned toward her. Employees stopped gathering their materials. Even Charles remained standing. Victoria faced Nathan directly. Earlier today, I judged someone based on a title instead of character. The room became completely still. I ignored good advice because it came from someone I underestimated. Nathan shifted slightly, clearly uncomfortable being the center of attention. Victoria continued anyway, and I treated a good man without the respect he deserved. Her voice remained steady, but sincere. For that, I am sorry. No one spoke. The apology echoed through the conference room with more power than any presentation that day. Nathan looked at her for a moment before nodding gently. Thank you. There was no anger in his voice. No satisfaction. Just grace. Victoria took a breath. I would like to offer you the position of Chief Design Advisor. Several executives nodded immediately. Ryan looked relieved. It seemed like the obvious outcome. A prestigious title. A substantial salary. Recognition at last. Nathan smiled politely. Then he surprised everyone. No, the room blinked. Victoria stared at him. No. Nathan shook his head. I appreciate the offer. He glanced toward the windows where the afternoon sun had begun slipping lower across the skyline. But there is somewhere I need to be every afternoon at 3:30. Understanding slowly appeared on Victoria's face. Emily. Nathan smiled. Emily. Charles Whitmore laughed softly. Some things matter more than corner offices. Nathan picked up the small box containing his belongings. Most things do. Another silence followed. A warm one this time. A respectful one. Victoria extended a business card toward him. Then at least allow us to keep the door open. Nathan accepted the card. That seems fair. Less than 20 minutes later, he stepped out of Hayes Innovations once again. Only this time nobody escorted him. Employees nodded as he passed. Receptionists smiled. Security officers held doors open. Respect had finally caught up with the man who never demanded it. Across town, the final school bell rang. Children poured from the building carrying backpacks, science projects, and weekend plans. Emily Walker spotted her father immediately. Dad. Nathan smiled as she ran toward him. How was the celebration? Emily grinned. Amazing. Then she looked up at him carefully. How was your day? Nathan considered the question. Behind him, the city continued moving beneath the fading light of evening. Ahead of him stood the person who mattered most. He smiled and took her hand. Unexpected, he said. But good. Together they walked toward home. The noise of the city softened behind them. The sun dipped lower across the Chicago skyline. And somewhere far above the streets, inside a glass tower filled with brilliant people, an important lesson remained. Respect is not earned by titles. Wisdom is not measured by appearances. And sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who never feels the need to prove it.